So yeah, I'm quite a bit of a hard ass for Peter to do this, but I'm glad he could come join us. So I'll just kind of rattle off a bit of a biography for him, to kind of situate him as practice, what he's done as a landscape architect, designer, and scholar. So Dr. Peter Connolly is an associate professor of landscape architecture at Victoria University of Wellington School of Architecture. He's also taught at RMIT in Melbourne, Australia, Unitec in Auckland, New Zealand, and was at the University of Pennsylvania as a visiting professor by invitation of James Corner. During his time at RMIT, he developed the first post-professional design research degree in landscape architecture in 1995, and later in 2003, published alongside René van der Velde, the first substantial work on landscape architectural design research. This book, entitled Technique, has been internationally recognized for its clarity and impact across both academic and professional levels. During his time at Unitec, he established a graduate school of practice-based research, one of the first in New Zealand, I believe, well, maybe the first. Peter's internationally recognized for his work on theorizing design and practice research, and is regularly invited to lead or participate in workshops on these topics at various universities around the globe. Where was I? At VUW, he supervised the first practice-based PhD in landscape architecture myself, and is currently supervising several more, I believe. At least Leandros is one. And he's also been attributed with introducing the term landscape urbanism to design discourse through his Masters of Urban Design through RMIT in 1994. With that in mind, I'd also like to share a more personal note that he's really shaped my practices as a designer, as an academic, and I have yet to meet someone who has a greater sensitivity to landscape itself through design. And so I'm particularly thrilled to introduce Peter and have him introduce some of his work and ideas for you guys here. Over to you, Peter.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much for those kind words, Shaun. I'll just see if I can get my, oh no, wrong. Sorry, wrong setting. What can you see there?
Just you.
Do I need to share, don't I?
Yep.
Yeah. It's 6:30 in the morning, folks. Okay, so share. Oh, you've host this disabled screen share.
I'll fix it for you. Sorry.
Okay.
Then all participants, there you go. Try that.
Okay. Where are we? I think that's right. So you should see just the title. Is that right?
That's it.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Shaun. And I have to say that actually, where's my? I'm looking. Yeah, just making sure I'm looking at the right monitor. I have to say that I'm incredibly sad that, I mean, happy for you guys that Shaun is there, but Shaun is, you guys, it's our loss that you have Shaun. So I really hope you appreciate how amazing he is. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, Shaun has just, he went over some of the stuff I'm going to do for my intro, so I'm probably just going to scrap my whole intro about myself. And so I'm a landscape architect and an urban designer, and I teach at Victoria University in Wellington. And this talk is based on a very short 15-minute presentation at a conference last week. It was the Institute conference, so it was kind of fairly, I had to make it quite accessible. So it's also a pretty tight presentation, and that means that I don't really probably explain things in a lot of detail. I'm going to read it out rather than free flow it. I've added a case study, and so this should give us some time for questions and discussion at the end. So if there's any, for anything which was skated over too fast or whatever, should be able to deal with that through questions. Okay, so oh, what's happening there? Oh, yes. Yeah, so I focus my teaching, as Shaun kind of alluded to, I focus my teaching on and research on the practices of designing landscape, on technique, on how you do things. Actually, I'll just make a reflection. I participated in a design research webinar a couple of days ago, I can't remember when it was, that some of you probably went to. It was with Alan Deming and some other people, and it was suggesting that it was an introduction to design research, and I was a little bit sort of taken aback by the approach that was being presented. Like, it started off with a history suggesting that in the 60s, design research was about looking at design itself. And I thought, oh, that's kind of odd, because most design research that's the main focus, is looking at that. And then it sort of went away from that and seemed to hold on to this division between what they were calling subjectivism and objectivism, and it was claiming not to be positivist, claiming not to just to go beyond science. And I think it was certainly proposing that, but I didn't get the sense that there was a strong embrace of the actual act of designing itself. And Ellen suggested that, in the future, if she was looking at it, looking at this further, she would lean more into subjectivism. And even to use the word subjectivism I find a little bit strange. So anyway, I thought that might maybe be interest to people who went to that webinar, and quite happy to talk about that. And what I'm talking about here will relate directly to that, even though it doesn't directly discuss it. So I have a range of design interests, but central to all of them is an obsession with how a designer engages with experience and sociality in the landscape. I spend lots of time developing fieldwork, drawing, analytical and design practices to experiment with what I call socio-experience. For me, the main game of landscape architecture is how to make a difference to the world through the design of landscape. Of late, I find myself reminding students that this only happens through the very concrete body-space relations. Let's approach this from a distance. Biologists have shown that organisms have spent 3.5 billion years evolving to live with the world that they have evolved with. They now understand it is an abstraction. It is an abstraction from reality to not focus on these combinations. Such combinations are invariably ecological, not necessarily biologically ecological. They certainly are, but they're in terms of humans, they're socio-experientially ecological. It is only in certain parochial human culture, Western culture in the last few hundred years, that we have developed an understanding that we are somehow separate from our world. This belief has caused us all sorts of problems. This has not been a significant problem for most other cultures, and it's fantastic to live in New Zealand and come from Australia. And in New Zealand, the incredible, one of the most profound things is how important Indigenous culture is, and it's also just starting to really get going in Australia as well. How to go beyond this cultural idea that we are separate from each other and the world around us. Oddly, we also kind of know that we are not separate from the world. Yet we struggle to know how to embrace our connection, how to see our connection, how to work with it as a designer. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has come to be very critical of the Western assumption that our way of relating to the world is that the mind leads the body. He says we tend to believe that there is something like a little person in our head that looks out at the world and more or less consciously and rationally evaluates what it sees and instructs the body to respond. He has found the exact opposite. For him, we do not consciously evaluate the world out there. We instead evaluate our own body's responses to what is out there. He also distinguishes the preconscious brain from the conscious mind. It's not the conscious mind that works with the body. The preconscious, not immediately anyway, the preconscious brain works with the body and is already evaluating before consciousness starts to engage with our connection to the world. He thinks that we have not appreciated the many complex ways that our bodies monitor inputs from the world and our own body states. The bulk of these are happening before consciousness. For him, we do not simply respond consciously or rationally to the world out there. We instead respond to how our own body has already, before consciousness, responded to inputs. feelings or sensations are central here. For Damasio, the neural patterns that make up the basis of feelings have two mechanisms.
Peter, sorry to just interrupt. Are you meant
Yeah.
to be changing slides? Because we're not seeing
Oh.
a change.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah, you're right. How's that working? Just a sec.
no.
Sorry. How's that working? I must be. Wait a minute, just a sec.
Right. I thought it was worth asking.
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay, but I want to fix it because it's.
It was working just then.
I'm showing slides.
We're seeing like this weird multicolor. Oh, so we're seeing your desktop now.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty messy, isn't it? Okay. I'll just see if I can get back to the one where I was at. I think I was just there. So I'll just. I don't know. Let me look. What?
All right.
What's
we
appearing?
can see Damasio's book now.
And can you see two mechanisms?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, well, let's hopefully it stays there. I'm sorry about that. I'll just show you one slide that I showed, and I was just, that's actually, it's not changing when I'm changing it on here. That's something, it's at my end, not your end. How do I deal with that? What I might have to do. Oh, I'm gonna have to, okay, I know. I'm gonna have to like change both the slides at the same time. Okay, I'll just go back. I just showed this image here of as an example of a organism environment assemblage, and how the environment, and you can't really separate out you can't just look at the animal, you've got to look at the whole environment to understand why, and the power that's produced by that animal. So anyway, I don't know if that's the only image really. The other ones were just kind of quotes. Just sort of showed some quotes about a Maori quote, which was a famous quote that Shaun knows well. And it translates as "I am the river is me." And in Australia, oh, sorry, I'm still not. I need to. Sorry. Doing two things. And so then the "I am the river is me," and then the idea of speaking as country. So Garangiri, people talk about speaking as country, and so when they're talking, they are country and they're representing country. Okay, so I'll get into this idea. This quote I showed, and I think we'll go to here. So sorry about that. So now, I know what I'll do. One hand, not for one thing, one hand for the other. Okay, so for Damasio, the neural patterns that make up the basis of feelings have two mechanisms. There is the body loop mechanism, where due to sensory inputs from outside the body, what he calls the body landscape is changed. And then this is mapped by the central nervous system from the brainstem up. This results in a feeling that we may engage with consciously. This is happening all of the time. It is a real-time mechanism, if you like. Oops. The second mechanism he calls the as-if body loop. And I think this is a very profound thing that he found. It is as if the body had really been changed by outside factors, but it has not. This mechanism functions without sensory inputs from the outside body. Whoops. Oh, something happening with my slide. It's probably my finger. Oh, no, I see. This mechanism functions without sensory inputs from the outside body in the preconscious mind. Oops. Sorry, I'm just trying to work out two things at the same time. It functions, for instance, when a human anticipates something up ahead, and in the process, then unconsciously experiences the feelings associated with the predicted event about to happen. This allows a human or whatever organism to respond in advance to avoid or to engage suitably. It is an inbuilt preconscious form of simulation. And that's the important thing. Less urgently, we can stand at the top of a riverbank, say, and feel what it is like to scramble down to the water without actually doing it. The same mechanism can also be done in isolation from a relevant event, as a simulation in the mind only. In this case, it is even more obvious that the body inputs are not needed for the preconscious brain to feel what the body would feel in such a situation. And we feel the potential to us of a landscape space as we enter the space. Again, these two mechanisms happen before conscious thought. Damasio is here exploring part of what is called the sensory motor system. This is the bodily system of an organism that evaluates sensory inputs and responds to them through bodily responses and actions. Importantly, the response is not immediate. There is a small gap of time between the input and response. This gap allows the body to feel and evaluate the incoming sensations and select a suitable response. This process happens before consciousness. Habit is important here. If the situation is something that has been dealt with easily before, the body responds habitually, and the conscious mind may not need to be engaged. If the situation is foreign, threatening, or captivating, or where it offers significant potential, the body responds more attentively, and these responses are experienced as sensations, which consciousness might then register and respond to itself. Habit is built up. Habit is built up over the life of the organism. It deals efficiently with things that are easy to deal with, thus allowing the conscious mind to focus on what warrants greater attention. Importantly for us, habits also provide a reference matrix for evaluating inputs and sensing potential. Organisms are supertuned to sense potential. This potential comes in the form of potential empowerment. An organism is directly empowered by its sensory connections to the world around it, and habit also provides a means to sense the potential and relevance of any relationship in that connection. After this evaluation, the sensory motor system also then provides the response that works with this potential. Here are some human environment assemblages where you should be able to feel something of the different varieties of power they produce. I was thinking of trying to find a basketball team instead of a rugby team, but you probably get the picture. Oops. It's not moving. Something's not moving here, Shaun. Oh, sorry. I had to jump way ahead. What's going on here?
We're looking at Yahoo now.
Yeah, I know. I can see that. Just a sec. I'll just take it back. I don't know what happened then. Something stuck in my computer. And it's part of the slide. Oh, there we go. Oh, wait. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what's happening to change my position so I can touch buttons properly. The response produced by the sensory motor system is a power, an empowerment of the body that the 17th century philosopher Spinoza also called affect, or simply joy. Recent thinkers call this power simply affect with an A. An affect is a power. This is a power that is produced by its connections. Such affects are involuntary energizings of the body or energizing actions of the body. These powers or effects are shared across the connections. An organism's relations or connections with the world are always complex. The philosopher Gilles Deleuze and the psychoanalyst Felix Guattari call such complex sets of relations assemblages. Assemblages produce powers. Joyful affects are uplifting sensations or powers. Let me give you an example of a landscape assemblage and some of the power it produces. Oh, come on. It's not changing again. Oh no, it's probably going to jump ahead. Why is that doing that? Here we go. All right, didn't do it too much. Okay, so this case study focuses on the experience of visiting Pukeahu National War Memorial Park, which is a kind of like a plaza associated with the War Memorial Building, which is just up the hill. Memorial in red stone commemorates the long and close relationship between the people of Australia and New Zealand. The plaza has been built over a very busy highway which cuts through the city. I'm not showing this necessarily just to talk about how wonderful this design is. It's more about to make some points. If I can get things to work. This space is located in a relatively small city. By the way, I'm just actually giving you an example of how to employ the as-if body loop. And I will come back to that and ask you questions about it afterwards. This space, and in terms of a simulation, this space is located in a relatively small city, in the relatively small city of Wellington, which is the capital of New Zealand, where I live and where Shaun was. The central part of the city is located between the hills and looks out over the harbour. Please change. Yes. This view shows the plaza in the foreground on the edge of the central city. We will move down onto the ground in a moment. The red dot shows the location. The central part of the city sits on a relatively flat area for the hilly city of Wellington, and you can probably sense how this part of the city drops down to the harbour. This street view image gives you an idea of the slope of the street. And hence you should be able to feel or sense something of what it is like to walk uphill on this street. If you found yourself here on Taranaki Street and heading south towards Pukeahu, it is likely that you would either be walking home to a residential area to the south, or a non-local visiting the park or the War Memorial buildings. So you were walking slightly uphill on a long constant slope on this usually busy wide road and just about to reach the intersection with the highway. Just before the highway, you reach the grass of the Memorial Park area to your left, and for a moment, and for a moment, your attention and eyes will be drawn up to the turf slope to the tower of the War Memorial building on the horizon. Once past the pavilion, you reach the edge of the city highway intersection. And you now reorient your movement to the left. Walking up this ramp or slope requires slightly more effort than walking up Taranaki Street. As you reach the top of this slope, this path turns, and you are often preoccupied with negotiating with others and just the change of direction. To your left, the raised grass surface reduces in height, and the sound wall that is now behind you effectively blocks out all of the sound from the motorway, and you don't tend to notice that it's already done that. As you reach the surface of what feels like the plaza proper, your body turns to the left, and the surface that you have reached is now flat and opens right out. And you slow down, your shoulders drop, and your body straightens, relaxes, and opens up to what is now around you. There is a strong sense of achieving and arriving at what feels like a plateau-like surface. The sense of arrival is accompanied with a feeling that you're suspended up above the city here. Your attention may again be drawn up to the tower that now looms over this plaza, and then across to the red stone pillars of the memorial to the left. Your eyes scan around, feeling the depth and width of the space and the flat expanse of the surface, and stop on whichever people or groups who are there. There are usually people sitting or stationary or wandering around. This plateau surface is a destination for those interested in the museum, memorial, and military events. It is also a focus for skaters and for locals wanting a sense of escape. Most people tend to be passing through, and these will either slow down or at least be open and attentive to or emerge from this workaday focus while moving through, attentive to the space and whatever is happening there. This slope to your right is close and tall, with the tower, steps, and background wall of dark native trees forming a solid vegetative edge to the space that intensifies the expansive flatness and brightness of the paved stone surface. The darkness and horizon of this treed edge then draws your eye further ahead to the more distant treed background, and your eyes then follow the horizon further around to the left, out over the city, towards the open sky that is above the harbour, which is just out of view. The hills on either side of the city now combine to frame this open view. The plaza level allows you to glimpse tops of the roofs of some of the many downslope buildings to the north where you have just come from. The location of this surface means that it is one of the few public places just outside the central city where you can get an expansive view. However, the surface is not high enough simply to be a classic viewing point that enables a scenic view of the city or the sea. It is more like a viewing experience, looking out to the wide and open, brightest part of the sky above the city, with the strong sense that the city and the harbour and the world beyond are out there below you. There is, on this surface, a very strong sense of being on the edge of and slightly yet significantly raised above and set apart from the workaday world of the city, and of being located on the edge of the wide valley basin, contained by the surrounding hills on three sides, which the city sits in. A feeling of openness and expansiveness of this vast space and the containing hills and city below is now very present here on this raised surface. The edge of the city grid is located where the relative flatness of the city starts to rise into the surrounding hills. This produces a zone where pedestrians are normally limited to transitioning between city and home, a space set apart from the city, home, and also the transitioning between the two. The shift onto this flat level produces a slowing down and opening up of an explorative movement on this surface and a heightened sensitivity to the movement itself, to the feeling of the surface, its level above the city, its flatness, openness, and brightness, the smoothness and texture of the cut stone, the qualities of the plants, the softness of the carpet of grass, the activities of other people, especially the vividness and clarity of sounds produced by voices and bodies on this surface. The openness and expansiveness of the vast valley space of the valley is expressed through the intimacy of what is experienced in this attentive wandering movement, a collective feeling of this set-apart world local to itself. What is more obvious than the visual and spatial formality is that the heightened sensitivity when visiting here extends to the quiet respect and care for the use and enjoyment of others in this world apart, no matter who they are. So to come back to a bit of neuroscience, this case study attempts to give an account of an assemblage and the voluntarily produced effects by it. Such involuntarily produced responses and powers may come to consciousness, and consciousness may start to respond or to experiment with them. We are experts at surfing the joyful sensations and powers that the body has already started to produce. Effects can, of course, also be disempowering. Each species has evolved certain abilities to directly connect with the world, to connect with and respond to the world. At any particular time, each individual organism will have a certain disposition or orientation. Oh, sorry about this. Keep on touching the keypad. Each species has evolved certain abilities to directly connect with the world, to connect with and respond to the world. At any particular time, each individual organism will have a certain disposition or orientation. Oh, sorry about this. Keep on touching the keypad, the touchpad. At any particular time, each individual organism will have a certain disposition or orientation towards the world, and each particular human culture has evolved and are continually evolving their own empowering assemblages and ways of making sense of them. Till recently, it was assumed that there was one reality that could be known by science, and that there were subjective or cultural understandings of this reality. Such an assumption promotes the idea that human subjectivity is not connected to reality, that its connection is mediated or weak. The focus on consciousness got in the way of connecting to the power of our connection with the world. The focus on consciousness got in the way of connecting to the power of our connection with the world. However, it does not make sense that organisms, including humans, have a weak or mediated connection to the world that they are part of. Organisms have evolved with the world. A poor connection does not make sense. So in contrast to this idea of weak subjective connection or interpretive lens, the philosopher Henri Bergson argues for something much more direct. He basically says that in life, an organism is continually receiving a vast amount of sensory inputs, and that before consciousness, the sensory motor system focuses only on certain of these sensory inputs, only certain direct connections. So it's directly connected to the world, but it actually only focuses on certain of those direct connections and is empowered by these. The organism only focuses on the connections that are relevant to the particular situation it is in and ignores those that are less relevant. Before consciousness, an organism is directly connected to the world, and the sensory motor system allows it to evaluate and select which parts of its connections are most relevant to it and produces responses to them. So there is an involuntary power associated with direct bodily connection. However, habit has a downside. There is a tendency for humans, for instance, to be restricted to habitual forms of behavior by the way our culture simply simplifies things and tends to disconnect us from the power of direct connection. In the conception described above, consciousness might seem disempowered. However, consciousness is not. However, consciousness is not. It's because not because consciousness is a source of all things, but because consciousness is powerful. Something got edited out here. Consciousness is powerful not because it is a source of all things, but because of its ability to work with what comes before it. Consciousness is powerful to the degree that it engages and experiments with the power that the body is already starting to produce. Together, this combination of conscious and pre-conscious brain and body is a powerful problem-oriented experimental machine. Oops. Okay. Another point to make here, which also goes against common sense, is that the unfolding connection we have with the world is expressed in the empowerment, inside the empowerment, in the affect itself. Before consciousness, the whole of our unfolding relation to our environment is expressed through our unfolding effects. And so that a joyful experience expresses the world. I think a few people have said that before. A joyful experience expresses a world that produces the joyful experience. The world is expressed in the experience and before consciousness. Our bodies are continually making sense of our direct connection with the world. For Deleuze, each power comes with a preconscious significance, or what he calls sense. Each power expresses its sense. This sense-making also makes the worlds that we unfold within. Oops. Worlds are also produced before we are conscious of them. Think of the tribal market, or the picnic, or the world associated with the plateau of Pukeahu, if I've been half successful at describing it. The slow movement that the plateau engenders in us comes with an openness and attentiveness to our environment, near and far, and to others. This is a singular, involuntarily produced power, produced by an assemblage associated with Pukeahu. We sense the world, and we can also sense the relevance of any part of the world that plays a role in our empowerment. The world can be sensed being expressed in sensations, qualities, bodily movements, objects, surfaces, spatial relations, intense moments, whatever. As I talked about, the grass and the surface and the dark trees and the people and the skaters and your sensitivity and everything like that, that's all being sensed through all those things. This should in a way seem obvious. However, because effects and their expressions, significance, and worlds are not visible and happen before consciousness, good old Western common sense strongly tends not to grasp or understand them. Another thing Western common sense does not deal well with is sociality or collectivity. Oops, come on, change. Okay. Giacomo Rizzolatti identified that the as if body loop is not restricted to a single animal or human's experience. His studies identified what he terms mirror neurons in primates and humans. These are neurons that discharge both when a monkey or a human performs a specific action, and also when it observes another individual performing a similar action. So the same neurons fire when we observe someone else doing something as when we are doing it ourselves. According to Vittorio Gialesi, this contrasts with traditional Western understandings of others, which have assumed that understanding others is about attempting to understand their conscious minds. And this is done more or less consciously and based on rational inferences and predictions. The discovery of mirror neurons, in contrast, calls this account of a theory of mind into question, suggesting instead that knowledge of other minds occurs at a more primitive level, and it is not really about minds. It is instead about bodily responses. This mirroring process is not carried out consciously, but happens automatically and unconsciously. And according to Gillespie, is likely a basic organizational feature of the brain. The purpose of this mirroring is social. It is to create an interpersonal link between humans or between other animals. With other animals. And we feel what others feel when we are watching their actions and responses. Well-known New Zealand dance choreographer Michael Parmenter describes how when we watch a dancer, we feel what they feel. Likewise, we find films engrossing, as we usually cannot help but feel what the actors are experiencing. We are taken along for the emotional ride, unless it is a crap movie. This process is automatic and happens before consciousness. Such mirroring of responses and actions in observers produces understanding and emotions between individuals at the level of the body itself, rather than primarily at higher cognitive levels. According to Gillespie, our system resonates with the system of the other person who we are observing. Neuroscientists don't just talk about mirror neurons, but also about shared systems. This allows us to sidestep the old problem of how we know other people's minds, because this is the wrong question. It is instead about how we connect to their bodily responses and actions. Such shared actions occur in the body and between bodies, linking bodies and preconscious brains, rather than in the conscious mind considered independent of the body. Other writers have discussed the contagious nature of affects, and the transmissibility of affects, so that affects are not just individually felt, but freely shared between people due to our inbuilt abilities to sense responses and due to our inbuilt abilities to sense responses and effects through watching and experiencing and interacting with others. And as an example shown here, might suggest, effects are not just freely shared between people, but also with our worlds. Preconscious effects join us to each other and to our worlds. Our worlds are collective worlds, and where collective is not just about human collectives, but about a collectivity that is human and non-human. All this happens before we've thought, but us Westerners tend to not notice it. I hope you get some sense that this might be relevant to design practice. Let me describe one thing. I've said that the as-if body loop and shared circuits allow an organism to simulate their own or another's bodily empowerment, separate from the actual response happening in real time. So that a designer, for instance, can come to a particular site that they're working on with a certain disposition, one oriented towards a certain spatial problem, say. They're then able to consciously employ this body simulation process to connect with and start to identify the relevant involuntarily actions or experiences that they have or are experiencing or observe being experienced. The sensation of the response produced by this simulation then facilitates their ability to sense the relevant spatial factors that interact to produce this experiencing. They can sense not only their part in the experiencing power, but also the relevance of the spatial of that spatial factor in this power and its potential. Such factors are relationships, and not only can they feel the relationship, they can also feel how the power varies with variations in the relationship. They are then able to produce drawings which show some of the relevant spatial relations in a way where we can see or imagine the relation to relevant human bodily movements. So if we have done this well enough, what we now have is a designerly simulation of reality, where on one hand, we are starting to give an account of the involuntariness of the experience, and on the other, we are starting to produce some of the key spatial relationships of this reality that produce that experience. The drawing, being a drawing, then can allow us to manipulate these spatial relations, as we also have a sense of how variations of spatial relations produce variations in experiencing power. We are now able to explore variations in line work and hence start to manipulate and experiment with the realm of experience that we are starting to identify. Here are some drawings by one of our ex-thesis students. On the left are a small selection of very extensive, very large, extensive documentation of how edge conditions around Wellington facilitated different effectual responses and actions in Jessie. As part of her investigation, she custom developed a practical set of drawings to visualize the relevant body-space relationships and how variations of spatial relations produce variations of empowerment and responses. This combination of a connection to affect and the relevant spatial relations became part of the designer's body, as it does. This allowed Jessie to have a stronger ability to be able to sense and experiment directly with the drawings, with what the drawings could do with the experiential power of edges. And I've included a drawing of Shaun's here, which you may have already seen. Hope he does not mind. Here he is showing how variations in body space relations are associated with significant shifts in bodily responses. Here he is demonstrating that the sublime, which was his focus of attention, is not just, as tends to be assumed nowadays, some abstract concept, but is produced by concrete spatial relations, which are body space relations. And the forces that we call sublime vary with variations in body space relations. And the designer can experiment with such powers or forces or powers through drawings. To conclude, such experimentation can, in relation to the relevant spatial problem, then be an experimentation with our connection to the world and to others, with our part in human and human non-human collectives, with the uniqueness and power of experience, with the production of territories and worlds, with the expression of the world in our design and experience, and all of these simultaneously, pardon me, in the quest to make a difference in the world. Of course, this makes it sound easy. Hopefully, this sketch at least suggests that there is a whole realm of practices to be developed, which I have with many students, PhD candidates and research assistants been very focused on for some time. And so I was curious about, partly curious about the idea that in the 60s, that in the past it was an historical thing to focus on design itself, which to me is really the main game. So hopefully this gives you some sense of the concreteness. And just one other thing, which I note down to myself, this idea of the as-if body loop. Designers, it's not something that's foreign to designers, even though they may not have known this term. And Deleuze and Guattari also, they talk about expression, and which is the most ignored concept in recent design discourse. There was a whole focus on design discourse that was inspired by Deleuze and Guattari, which got taken off into a sort of scientific mode, and that then became sort of our interest in performativity and things like that, which featured in the design research seminar. But designers designers have had terms for this in some design school, good design schools, I think, and some good designers or some people who are attentive to design use terms like friction and resonance and traction and connection to describe a sort of feedback you get when you're connecting to the power of the world, when you're engaging with the as-if body loop. And I spoke to Beth Meyer, for instance, and she said that they use the word friction, I think it was friction, to describe that sort of feeling. So without any theory, designers have come across this term themselves, and such a notion is like central to design research today. So yeah, so maybe with that I'll finish up. And thank you, and I hope I didn't go too fast, and I'm very happy to take questions. Do you want me to sorry.
That's fantastic. It kind of worked out quite well having you this week, because I spoke last week, and so
okay,
over a few things, and you went into much more depth.
Okay.
I kind of intentionally knew you would.
Okay.
I think the synergies between and kind of a glimpse of a little bit of the Australasian design practice through these last 2 weeks.
Good.
Questions? If anyone's got questions, you might have to come up here and speak, because the microphone might not reach you. Oh yeah.
And it's also good to see in person.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, so thank you very much for talking. It was awesome. I did have one quick question. It was so you're talking about mirror neurons and like taking energy from other people with their reaction and their experience in seeing it. how can we have this similar conscious interaction with our energies and landscape elements? So like, how can we, or I guess that's the question.
It's, I guess, you don't so much take energy as share it with them. You feel their responses. You're directly feeling their responses, and their responses you feel because you feel those sorts of responses. And the reason why you share it with landscape is that humans are part of the landscape, like all organisms are part of the landscape. And so in this landscape we're looking at on the image there, I tried to describe how when you come up here, there's an empowerment produced there, which basically the empowerment is a very subtle thing. You slow right down and your body opens up and your eyes open up and you take in the world around you. And the reason why you do is because all of these things are part of your empowerment. And so your empowerment is actually spread across this whole thing. And that's why it creates a world. It spins spontaneously before you've even thought it's created a world. And so that power is actually spread across that whole world. And so if, for instance, you're holding a pen, it's not you that has the power, it's you and the pen and the paper and the table all together are empowered. And so affects the power of things that are just spontaneously spread across things. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I guess more in terms of like, so you're talking about how like the pen, the paper, the table, they all have the power. How do we as humans know to distinctively look out for that pen instead of the other?
Our bodies have evolved to connect to the world, and some people talk about the parts of the world as an extension of the body, which is a little bit too human-centric, but we're not actually separate things. So humans and all organisms have evolved to be part of the world, and that being part of the world empowers them. So they know instinctively, if you like, they know what those things do. Even as a baby, you're learning what the ground is like, and without knowing gravity, you sort of gravity is also part of what is powerful for you. The ground is powerful. Yeah, I don't know, does that help?
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Yeah, cool.
Have you got a question? Might as well come on up. So.
I was just wondering if you could kind of expand a little bit on reconciling the kind of non-dual ontological arguments you were articulating towards the beginning with landscapes like the one that's pictured here, which seem to be kind of the epitome of a late-stage capitalist, like totalitarian police state. So it's again, it like emphasizes the Western concept of a monument in something that is permanent and is also like easy to surveil and easy to police.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. The idea of, in terms of ontology, I guess the first recent ontologist would have been Deleuze-Guattari, and so ontology. So this here, it's interesting you say that, because like all things are ontological, whether they've been designed by fascist states or whatever. And so this here is just, it might have all those things, but being created by, I wouldn't say it's a police state, but being created by government or funded by government doesn't actually stop how it works, doesn't actually stop its ontology. The intentions and who does things don't make ontology. So here I'm trying to describe that there are military things that happen here, and you may or may not like those. Strangely, you also get skaters and other people, homeless people and stuff hanging around here, and the two can be in a place at the same time. So there's this potential there, which is goes beyond any intentions. Intentions don't, as I was saying, they don't really define things. That doesn't mean that the order of the world is not ordered in a way which gets you to do things which are capitalist or whatever. But within capitalism, there are affects are produced within capitalism, and those affects cut across capitalism and allow you to experiment with things beyond it. And so the idea of assemblage allows you to discern potential in the world that goes beyond any supposed laid out order. And in fact, the more order you have, the more things come out that cut across it, and that are potential for things which maybe go beyond capitalism or whatever. And I suppose I'm particularly interested in, and I know Shaun is as well, in ontological questions related to Indigenous culture, which is really an important topic in New Zealand. And I think one of the things about the ontology of the West is that the West has been, it's not only colonized Indigenous people, it's also colonized Western people as well. And so one of those forms of colonization is the idea that you're separate from the world around you. And to me, it's really important one of the important tasks is to get Westerners and also Westernized Indigenous people to connect to the world. And so we may not be connecting to what Maori call whakapapa, or mana or Maori, but we're connecting to the world in some way. And so I think that allows you to have some sort of connection to like to have some sort of resonances and ability to deal with things like Indigenous relationship to the world, with gendered empowerment of space, with how spaces have the ability to create connections between, say, homeless people and other people, which don't tend to be noticed, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if that's a good answer.
Yes, thank you.
Any others? All right, well, I can wrap it up then. Maybe we give Peter one last round of applause, especially for the wake-up.
All right, thank you. Thanks very much, Shaun.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks everyone for coming on, and big shout out to